Hi, I'm Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance of Canada, NCA. Tonight we have a powerful presentation on China's influence, the Communist Party of China, the People's Party of China's influence into the mainstream parties, the establishment, the private sector, and in Canada as a whole. So what we're going to do tonight is peel away the layers one by one. So by the end of this presentation, you will have a full understanding or a very good understanding of what's happening and why this is not good for Canadians, the country. It's actually quite unbelievable, but once you start to connect all the dots, you'll have a really good understanding of what's happening to this country. In our opinion, NCA, the country's been sold out by these mainstream parties and their handlers, globalist corporations, globalists, completely sold out. The Canadian people are pushed to the side. This is what's happening. And one of the main vehicles, as we mentioned, is sustained mass immigration, which is causing a major transformation of Canada. So please try to listen to the whole thing. It will start to build as we start to lay out the facts, one fact after another. So we're going to start in right here. This is on the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The current government, the Liberal Trudeau government, joined this back in 2016. It's called the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. What this bank is a rival to the World Bank, which is a Washington, D.C. based institution that finances infrastructure projects. The World Bank is almost always headed by an American, the International Monetary Fund, on the other hand, is always headed by a European. And what's the significance of this? This has ties to the Power Corporation of Canada, the Desmarais family, the wealthiest family, and their massive investments in Asia. Also, SNC Lavalin. SNC Lavalin, as most Canadians know, was in trouble. In 2013, the World Bank debarred SN Lavalin and more than 100 of its affiliates from maintaining its financing for 10 years. So the purpose of this Asian investment bank was to bypass the World Bank and open up projects for SNC Lavalin, the Desmarais family, the Power Corporation, etc. That's what that was about. And you can see how these globalist corporations are working hand in hand with establishment, the mainstream parties, the federal government, and Ottawa. These two Canadians have been taken into custody by China, as we all know. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And this is in retaliation for the Huawei extradition arrest. Canada extraditing one of the executives to the U.S. What's interesting about the detainment of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig is their background. And it's claimed in certain circles that these two Canadians were basically spies of Freeland and the federal government. Spavor runs an organization on cultural exchange, works to encourage both outside investment and Western tourism in North Korea. Pretty bizarre. Spavor is considered friendly with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, which makes the charges against Spavor even more strange. North Korea is a close ally of the Chinese government. Kovrig is a diplomat, former diplomat to China, and advisor to a Brussels-based think tank called International Crisis Group. International Crisis Group is a globalist think tank, as demonstrated by George Soros as one of the funders of it. But we're going to get further into that. But just keep this in mind. These are the two Canadians that were arrested and are in detainment as we speak. If we go into the International Crisis Group, another layer here, it says it's an NGO that seeks to avert, resolve deadly conflicts around the world. It's funded by George Soros' Open Society Institute. Founded in 1995, independent nonprofit NGO of 130 staff members. It's headquartered in Brussels, and it has offices in Washington, New York, London, Moscow, and 17 field offices. Interesting, Canadian Louise Arbour, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, is the president and CEO. Louise Arbour was also the front person behind the UN Migration Pact, if we all recall. She's also a former Supreme Court judge. One of the group's co-chairs, Christopher Patton, was particularly critical of Israel and played a key role in the pending investigations into Palestinian misuse of EU funds. Also, they've been meeting with Hamas leaders and urging U.S. to open ties to this terrorist group. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, is on the board. Samuel Berger, who was President Bill Clinton's National Security Advisor, is on the board. On and on. Wesley Clark, the Center for American Progress. On and on. And most importantly, George Soros, founder of Open Society Institute. So this is a real globalist nonprofit organization that's being used to push the globalist agenda around the world, and it has links to Canada through Louise Arbour and this Kovrig Canadian who was detained in China. This video, as we dig deeper, this is the so-called opposition in Ottawa going after Trudeau for Chinese donating $1 million to the Trudeau Foundation.
Chinese billionaires paid $1,500 to meet the Prime Minister at yet another Cash for Access event. A billionaire real estate developer and bank founder Ted Ju, Jenny Key, an actress and real estate investor, the CEO of Gold Mount Capital International, and even a member of China's Communist Party attended this event. So over 80 exclusive Cash for Access events have been hosted by the Prime Minister and his cabinet, targeting wealthy stakeholders in the last year. Now, absolutely everyone can see the blatant conflicts of interest here. So why can't the Prime Minister?
Here. The Honourable Leader of the Government House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, unlike the previous government, Canadians have access to this government. This government committed to working with Canadians. We committed.
Order. Order. It's the opposition's responsibility to ask tough questions, but it's also the rules so we don't interrupt the answers. The Honourable. Order. Or else we could have a shortened question period. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will say that our government has embarked on unprecedented levels of public consultation to make sure that this government is responding to the very real challenges that Canadians are facing. And the member very well knows that we have some of the strictest fundraising rules in this country when it comes to fundraising. We will continue to follow the rules, and when you follow the rules, no conflicts of interest can exist. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Rideau-Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself was the star attraction at this exclusive Cash for Access event with Chinese billionaires. Zhang Bin is a political advisor to the Chinese government, and after attending the event, he and his partner, Mr. Gen Sheng, donated $1 million to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, including $50,000 to build a statue of the former Prime Minister. Now, we know the Prime Minister's love for the Chinese dictatorship, so what exactly did he promise the Chinese for their $1 million donation?
Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we know is that this government is working for Canadians. This government has lowered taxes on middle-class Canadians. This government has given more money to families with children that need it the most. Tax-free Canada a child benefit. This government will continue to work with Canadians. This government will continue to raise the bar on openness and transparency, and we are here to help grow the economy and grow the opportunities that Canadians need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So there's that video. And what it highlights is when Trudeau had a fundraiser with Chinese billionaires. Two of them with direct ties to the Chinese Communist government donated $1 million to the Trudeau Foundation. And $50,000 for a statue of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. So the obvious question is, what kickbacks are there? What pay to play is going on? But most importantly, what's not shown here is actually the so-called official opposition is in the same game. They're attacking the current government for the same things that they do. And I'm going to show this right now. This is what's going on now. This is in 2018 November. But there's a wealthy Toronto developer, Chinese. He's a former Liberal Party donor, Ted Zhao. And he set up 10 different nonprofit groups to raise money for the so-called Conservative Party. And this is all in areas where there's concentrations of Chinese Canadians. And if we go down here, Mr. Zhao's corporate website in China says he was a member of the Chinese Political Party Consultative Conference, CPPCC. The year he came to Canada, CPPCC is a political advisory body that falls under China's United Front Department. Membership is prized because it guarantees VIP treatment at airports and access to senior Communist Party officials. This group, the Chinese United Front Department, is responsible for projecting China's soft power, quote, soft power around the world and shoring up its support for its rule among Chinese diaspora. So there's direct evidence of the so-called opposition in the same game with a Chinese real estate person with direct ties to the communist Chinese government raising money for the Conservative Party. What strings are there to this Conservative Party? Why is he raising money for them? What is the pay to play? What kickbacks are there? Why is he doing this? What are the linkages to the communist government? That's only one example. That's only one example. This is the Canada-China Foreign Investment Promotion Protection Agreement. It's called FIPA. And this is what Harper and the so-called conservatives signed Canada onto. I'm sure most Canadians can remember back in 2012. It became into force in 2014. This is direct ties to the communist regime in Canada. Clear evidence. This is a 35-year secret trade deal with secret tribunals, and it allows Chinese corporations to override Canadian laws. This is what the so-called conservatives under Harper signed Canada onto. I think we all remember this. Between 2003 and 2013, China's direct investment in Canada increased from 216 million to 16.7 billion. While Canadian direct investment in China grew from 838 million to 4.9 billion. So keep this in mind going forward as we peel away more layers of the influence of China in Canada. Keep FIPA in mind. And here's another case under the so-called conservatives. It was pretty blatant, but keep this example in mind. This is involving Nexon, one of the biggest Alberta oil sands companies. The Harper regime cleared a 15 billion Chinese takeover of an energy company. Quote, Canada on Friday allowed a Chinese state-run oil giant to move forward with a 15 billion takeover of a domestic energy company. The acquisition Nexon by the Chinese National Offshore Oil Corporation. It is the latest effort by the Chinese government to find new sources of oil and natural gas reserves to help drive the country's growth. So keep this in mind. This was a major Chinese investment into the non-renewable sector in Alberta. Major investment. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Now I'm going to turn here. This is on Bernier. And this article is by Sean Paul Melville. He's based out of Montreal. He has really deep, penetrating insight into these globalist shills like Bernier. Bernier's been tied for decades to the social and solidarity economy. And this is about globalists, wealthy globalists dictating to the rest of society. And it goes back to the Parti Québécois and Premier Bouchard. And I'm going to cut to chase here. Basically, the social solidarity economy, quote, is indeed a true Marxist utopia where citizens share in the wealth of the nation, while our globalist puppet masters control the workings of the government, activist groups, labor groups, and the very citizens that they employ. Until, of course, the labor markets are flooded by migrants, cheap labor alternatives, whereby the demands for employment exceed job availability, and then the true struggles will commence. So this is a fact that this went on, and this ties into the Power Corporation and the Bernier family, which support UN Agenda 2030, which Harper adopted. They support the UN in general and global world order. Bernier is completely tied to this. So is every single PM since the 1970s. Bernier is also tied to the Koch brothers, the globalist billionaires out of the US who are worth almost $100 billion. The Koch brothers, they fund 15 think tanks in Canada to push their globalist trade, open borders agenda. And one of them is the Montreal Economic Institute, which Bernier is tied to. And finally, on Bernier, if you look at his policy, because I looked at them right away and it was a complete giveaway. He was praising Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, doing somersaults, saying how great that globalist trade deal is. And then he went on to say we need globalist, he called it free trade, but what he meant was globalist trade with China, globalist trade with India. Just remember that. What are his ties to the Chinese Communist regime? We know the Power Corporation is completely in bed with them. They have major investments there. So keep this layer in mind. Now I'm going to get right into the nuts and bolts of what's happening in Canada. So this is going on. This is from Immigration Watch, and it's talking about how the Chinese triads, the Chinese government, is infiltrating Canada through buying up corporations like Nexon and using that to steal trade secrets. They're also donating and buying out the mainstream parties to have direct influence over our country. But basically what's happening is that it's referred to a colony. They're viewing Canada as a colony. They're coming up, buying the companies, exploiting our unfinished resources, sending them back to China, and then selling them back to us. Similar to what the U.S. is doing with the oil from Alberta. It's getting sent down to the U.S. as unfinished product and then sent back almost double the cost to us. We're being exploited. The mainstream politicians have caved into these globalist corporations, these foreign globalist corporations, at the expense of the Canadian people. So there was a joint CSIS-RCMP investigation in 1997. It was called Project Sidewinder, and I'm going to talk about this report. And basically, it's about the national security threat of the Chinese Communist government in Canada. Jean Chrétien, as Prime Minister, had this report hidden. He had the report almost completely put off the radar, and obviously it has emerged later on, but I'm going to shed the light on this report. But there's some myths here with trade with China. Right now, China now exports more than 4 times as much to Canada, 38.3 billion, as we are selling them 9.3 billion. So we have the trade deficit with China expanded from 3.9 billion in 1997 when the Sidewinder report came out to 26.8 billion in 2006, and that number is even higher now in 2019. Quote, China is really using Canada almost as a colony, getting raw materials from us, selling them back to us in finished products, ranging from furniture and clothes to plastic and high-tech equipment. Canada doesn't need China. China needs Canada. And you can add in the exploitation of unrefined natural resources on top of that. Add that in. So think back to now Harper and Nexon. Think back to this Bernier and his globalist trade agenda, wanting globalist trade with China. Think about this. Think about Trudeau and the Asian Investment Bank, the $1 million in donations, these Chinese operatives fundraising for the so-called Conservative Party. I call them the Globalist Party because that's what they really are. If we dig further here, there's a myth that China has 1.3 billion consumers. The real consumer base is 300,000 people with privileged government positions. Quote, while few Canadian companies make money in China, he says the fantasy of broad-based beneficial trade has been created by people to justify a close relationship. He says the West's widespread trade deficits with China spring from low wages, prisoners, slave labor, counterfeit products, and pirated intellectual products. And yet we have people like Bernier who are doing somersaults trying to peddle globalist trade with China. And then we have Harper signing FIPA, a 35-year secret trade deal that gives China access to Canada and can bypass our laws. This is what's going on. I'm going to go further into the Sidewinder report. But basically, it was, as mentioned, from CSIS and RCP, that China remains one of the greatest ongoing threats to Canada's national security and Canadian industry. The report goes on to say, it was subtitled Sidewinder, that is a comparison of mainline China to a rattlesnake. Basically, the purpose of this report was to assess the extent of threat posed by the acquisition and control of Canadian companies by members, associates of Chinese triads, organized crime, and those with affiliations to Chinese intelligence spy service. A significant presence of organized crime was detected in investor immigrants from Hong Kong to Canada from the mid-1980s on. As of 1997, over 200 Canadian companies were under the direct and indirect control of China. Many Canadians will be shocked to learn that one of those 200 companies is CIBC, one of Canada's 5 largest banks. Another major bank in Canada under mainland China's control is the Hong Kong Bank of Canada. Other companies in control of the Communist Chinese regime, CITIC, Norinco Husky Oil, Grand Adex Properties Incorporated, Merrill Lynch, Gordon Capital Incorporated, Ramada Hotels, China Vision, Semitech Corporation. As mentioned, Chrétien, as Prime Minister, ignored the recommendations of Sidewinder. The report was destroyed. And the troubling aspect is that these companies, once these Chinese companies come in, they apply to receive government subsidies as Canadian companies for research or bid on classified contracts from the federal government. They gain access to classified contracts. They can run for contracts for classified communication systems that allow Chinese to obtain access to very sensitive information. They even bought Canadian companies that specialize in video surveillance. This is what's going on. And they're buying these companies as cover, as Canadian local identity, legally concealing their foreign identity. And this is more on the Sidewinder report. And this is on Chrétien's linkage to Gordon Capital. He was a visor and left as a wealthy man. Gordon Capital is linked to Mark Fung. And it's one of the financial company used in the Sidewinder report. It has links to China, Hong Kong billionaires. But this is what's going on. Also, there's another China International Trust Investment Company, China's largest conglomerate, and is 40% owned by the Chinese government. The Desmarais family of the Power Corporation is on the boards. The Communist government of China has given Power Corporation extensive access to the Chinese market and even forward a number of joint ventures with Desmarais. The Communists appointed Andre Desmarais in 1999 as director of CITIC Pacific, based out of Hong Kong. It's a rare privilege given to Communist Party's history of reserving company ownership for children of its ruling elite. Chrétien is linked to the Desmarais family as his daughter married one of the Desmarais. And this CIT is linked to a history of abetting China's arms deal intelligence activities. Henry Falk, Robert Woke are also, which are tied to these entities, have ties to the Chinese army, triad gangs, and Chinese leader. This links into Maurice Strong, Canadian, who brought Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which Harper adopted. And Bob Ray is linked to John Ray, who is tied to the Power Corporation as Executive Vice President. This links into also Martin, who's tied to the Power Corporation. He actually worked for the Desmarais, and the Desmarais sold him the shipping company, which he made money off. Martin was a former Prime Minister and PM. and on and on. You can read about this, but this is what's going on. The country has been sold. Mulroney is completely tied to the power corporation, the Desmarais. Pierre Trudeau, Harper has linkage to the Desmarais Power Corporation through Bernier and McKay. These are facts. This is on the Canada-China Business Council. CCBC, it's a private non-profit business association founded in 1978 to facilitate, promote business, trade, investment between Canada and the People's Republic of China. It has offices in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, Beijing, and Shanghai. CCBC is the de facto Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. It promotes closer bilateral relations between Canada and China, trade, investment in goods and services. CCBC hosts various events. Most notably, past events include a state visit by China Government General David Johnston in 2030, a visit by Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2012, at the time of FIPA. And this is where it gets interesting. CBC is a private, nonpartisan, membership-based business association with members from both Canada and China. Members include large multinational corporations, Barrick Gold, BlackBerry, Bombardier, BMO Financial, Export Development Canada, YWE Technologies, Manulife Financial, Power Corporation, SNC Lavalin, Sun Life Financial. CBC works closely with the China Council for promotion of international trade. So that should give you a snapshot of what's happening with China's influence in Canada. Please keep in mind the 1997 Sidewinder report. That's over 20 years ago. That's over 20 years ago. In our opinion, NCA, Canada is being sold out through these weak establishment stringed mainstream parties, without question. They're selling out our resources. They're selling out our workers, all in the name of these globalist profit, without question. Canada is being exploited by communist China. It's our resources, similar to what the U.S. is doing to the Alberta oil sands. The obvious no-brainer in terms of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba is we should have mega refineries here processing our unrefined resources and selling them as finished products, keep our jobs here. Instead, the country's being sold out. Our companies are being bought and sold. Foreign workers are flooding into Canada, taking Canadian workers' jobs. Harper was notorious for that and has continued under Trudeau, and the rest of the mainstream parties is status quo. Even the Bernier, he goes on about the importance of foreign workers. So all we could say is get behind NCA, National Citizens Alliance. We're all about Canadians first, Canada first. We're not against working with other countries, but we will stand in full opposition to the exploitation of our people, our country, our resources. And that's what's going on. This charade's been going on long enough. Please share the message tonight. Thank you.